This week on Around the Coin, we traveled to Apple's WWDC conference and saw firsthand what Apple is releasing that will shake up the world of payments. Around the Coin.
Good morning, everyone. Today, we are excited to talk about Apple's recent WWDC conference, who Brian attended, and we're going to look forward to hearing Brian's perspective there, as well as the ripple effect that had across the payment industry and what we can expect to see coming down the pipeline as a result in this intermediary time between Google I/O and we'll see how that goes. Brian, Faisal, how are you guys doing?
Good morning. How are you?
Great. So, Brian, what was it like? You went to WWDC. Did you get in the traditional route? Before the show, we talked about the conference, how difficult it is to get in. What was the scene like there? Was it just typical pandemonium?
It was amazing. I've been to a few. I was sort of non-traditional way of being there, but someday soon I will elaborate.
What does that mean? Were you there in the metaphysical sense, or
always metaphysical, always alchemical? But let's look at the themes of what I think is going on, and I'll theme this into location and how this is Apple going nuclear on Google, one of Steve Jobs' last requests. Location is obviously related to mobile, and iPhone is related to mobile. The entire future of computing is going in that direction. So Apple has slowly been building an infrastructure and premise for what I will call the merchant finder system, for lack of better terms. And this is all about what we've talked about previously concerning iBeacons and things like that. So let's first look at the stack. The stack is pretty simple. It is sonics, optics, magnetics, radio, and radio breaks down to NFC, closest, EMV, further, NFC and wireless EMV, iBeacons and Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and cellular. So we have that as the concentric rings around merchants and individuals to that matter. So recently, Apple acquired a company called SpotSetter. And SpotSetter is the best way to term this company is an aggregator of they have 40 million business profiles. And of those business profiles, 1 million are human curated. And human curation is a theme at Apple. It's one of the foundational reasons for the acquisition of Beats. And that's another subject. But human curation, very much like what takes place on Quora, is extremely important.
So pry into that a little bit. What do you mean by human curation on Beats? Did they screen their people before they can buy their headsets, or do you mean the demographic?
Music. No, Beats Music. Beats Music. One of the reasons why Beats Music has created such interest is the content is being offered by people who can tangentially connect that guitar style is related to this blues guitarist from the 1930s in this 2014 song, and merge those two songs together. Now, one would argue at some future date, algorithmically, you can do that. But thus far, all the other options out there have not even come close. And that's where Jimmy and Dre have really built a foundation. And as it builds out, you're going to see more human curators who are going to be doing more phenomenal connections. They're the modern disc jockeys that, if you grew up in my epoch, I grew up on college radio. And one of the reasons why I'm, so eclectic is college radio stations changed my view of music. They would connect all sorts of music. We were talking before the show about jazz, blues, early roots music that I had no idea existed. These connections are very, very important. How esoteric does it get? Well, that's really within the taste of the curator.
So Apple missed out on Waze. And some people will say that they were in, close contention. And Waze, the magic of Waze, as opposed to any other maps, is that they have, millions, if not billions, of people that provide input, right? They provide input to the traffic. Is a similar thing to you're saying
is
here.
Important. Yeah, traffic is important, but
here you're having the music being screened by other people.
Yeah,
that seems to be a key Apple's missing.
Yeah, absolutely. Traffic is definitely important. I think Waze was a disappointment for Apple not acquiring it. But SpotSetter is related to another company called Locationary. And this is another company Apple acquired that has 170 million business profiles. And this is coming from 250 odd feeds and repositories the company created. All of this was created by human curation over the space of about 5 years, and it's still active. Now, unlike what Waze is about and all these other things, is that we're talking about two different ways, obviously, two different ways to curate this information. One is you have this situation where you're taking social feeds, Twitter, Facebook, wherever, and moving that into a realm where it can be almost a Yelp-like review. Interesting, but certainly not enough defined information. Locationary, which Apple acquired early last year, a lot of people just thought, well, that's just a map play so that they can put little points on a map. Listen, business directories are the simplest things to buy. They're updated by the Yellow Page companies, and they literally are highly accurate. They have GPS location. You don't need human curators to tell you where a business is. And that data is extremely cheap. I can buy it for a few $100s. So Locationary is much more. These human curators would go into a store and find out detailed inventory, not exactly to the last pin being sold, but fairly detailed subject inventory of what's in that business, access points, all sorts of psycho and demographic information about the location, and that would be overlaid with other information that was historic about the site. How long has that business been there? Who's the actual owner? And all that was sort of stacked up. And so SpotSetter and Locationary, in my view, is not about maps. Wow, hey, look at that business on a map. It is about merchant discovery. It is about bypassing the traditional search systems that we currently are using to find and discover businesses where we want to spend money. So this is one side of the iWallet, and it's one of the reasons why it's so massive, and it's to call it a wallet, it's ridiculous.
How big of a win was this for Apple? Did they announce? Massive. I don't see the purchase price. Did they announce the purchase price? Any idea?
It's so low, it's not legally required for them. It's they acquired some talent.
Under 20 million?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. They weren't a massive company. They were only 7 months, I think.
They raised
maybe
2.5. Well, they raised 2.5 in 2009, so...
Yeah. That was their inception point, and had brilliant... I mean, I think it was 12 people at its max, and about 20... maybe 25% of the company isn't moving along with them. So, it was an acquire to some extent, but it was also about their foundational patented or a patent applied for scanning systems, which go out into the social feeds, suck in this information, and organize it in a highly usable format and put it on pins on a map.
So did you see evidence of them being integrated into WWDC?
No, it's too early. I mean, a lot of the iWallet stuff is just starting to surface. The very first thing that surfaced was the fingerprint scanner, obviously, and the secured enclave. Those two things had to come first. Hardware in Apple's world always comes before software, and a lot of people just don't understand that aspect of Apple. But you can go back. It's almost childlike to redo this research. You go back in time. You say, oh, now I know why Apple put that hardware there. They're going to introduce a software aspect to it at some later date. And so the Worldwide Developer Conference is really an ex post facto. It's never leading before the hardware in any major event. It's always the hardware that's already out there being utilized in a much stronger context. But there's also some points to the future on where there might be some new hardware, and but not enough for you to make a definitive sort of statement unless you study patents and really do research on it. So, all right, so location. Location is going to be playing a materially important aspect for the feeder system of how you and I will discover new merchants and places that we didn't know existed. And not just restaurants. See, a lot of these companies that
It's always the use case. It's always restaurants.
Yeah, everybody always goes after the restaurants, and Apple is looking at the greater world. 75% of commerce takes place in the real physical world. Apple knows that. And only 12% of that 75% is in dining. Only 12%. So if you're just primarily focused on dining, you're missing the vast majority of the world.
Do they look at that, Brian, just curious, do they look at that
Sure.
by transaction volume, do you know? Or the total number of exchanges, transactions?
Looking at dollar amounts, not the number of transactions.
Because I would imagine that number is vastly skewed by things like car purchases, jewelry, large jewelry purchases, right? You're going to buy a car, you're going to own that for 5 years. How does that weigh to your individual purchase of a lunch? So I'd say it's a decision you need to make much more often.
Profound point you're making there. And studying this over the decades, that data does skew. And there's ways to extract that. If you have regional data and you know where most of the car dealers are and you extract that data, you can get a more accurate picture from region to region as you are able to pull out some of these ADI regions that are primarily where the car dealerships are. And there's a whole impact that has on a local economy because car dealers tend to impact the tax basis in those areas. And so the types of businesses that surround it are somewhat different, and it can go down the road on this. But the basic premise is, even though there might be higher transaction volume at a McDonald's, the impact from a payment system perspective, dollar-wise, is going to be leading not to the car dealer, but maybe the larger jewelry store, maybe the larger furniture store. And yeah, maybe those transactions aren't happening every single day for the average homeowner. But if the population density is high enough, there is enough transaction volume coming from these businesses to be meaningful if you're deriving income from a percentage of those purchases, even if they're basis points. So
with Square Wallet closing, what makes you think Apple Wallet or their integrated wallet is going to crush it?
Well, because it's not a wallet really. Square approached this completely the wrong way, and we've discussed this, and I'm trying to liberate myself from sounding very negative about this, but essentially, they approached it from a complete lack of experience. But that's fine. We all have a lack of experience. But they arrogantly and aggressively opposed anybody who had experience. So they essentially said, we're disruptors, so I'm going to build what I like, and therefore I'm going to sell that to merchants. Whereas if they really went out into the greater world and talked to the practical and pragmatic merchant, they would telegraph, maybe not say it in their words, because a lot of times you have to really be empirical. You got to go out there and do the research, and then you observe, and then you present. And so what Apple has done is they've taken a very turtle versus hare approach. The startups were going to go out there and change the world. Apple's looking at it and say, okay, how do people use their devices? How does commerce take place? Why do people go to Google? Why do they go to Yelp? What are they really looking for? And they're building those foundations, and they're doing it very slow and very meaningful. So slow that most people say, "Oh, that's no big deal." They acquired that company just because they liked the programmer there or something, and that's ridiculous. Apple has never acquired a company because of one individual ever in their history of acquisitions. They always implement in some meaningful way. They stitch together the technology of the company they're acquiring, and so most of the tech press will look at SpotSetter, and they'll just isolate that and say, oh, that's going to be sort of a Yelpish kind of, Foursquare kind of thing. And yeah, it's no big deal. It's just going to be little bobbleheads popping up on maps. And then they'll forget that they acquired Locationary. And that really threw a lot of researchers and a lot of tech writers for a loop. Locationary was a knee-jerk reaction because they didn't get Waze. The two companies are absolutely not even in the same universe. Waze is primarily 99.99% about traffic mobility, period. Locationary is about the location of a business and what is that business doing? It's not just an idle picture. It's not even an idle picture of the products inside. It's a detailed human curation of what's taking place at that business. And it is the only place that I know of on the planet where somebody has delved that deep into the workings of each business where you have some reasonable intelligence if somebody's looking for, a haberdashery.
Brian, what were some of the clues by going to WWDC that you saw that you may not have picked up on if you didn't go, relating to, you had a great Quora post about tipping, you discussed the iWallet. Was there anything else? What was the iOS, the credit card reader? That's really interesting. Any sort of discussions you had with developers there to get
let me
clues?
continue on with the location aspect, right? Here's something that I think is just brilliant and so phenomenal. And I know myself and Faisal and you had talked about iBeacons and how the notification would take place when you enter in a store. Well, Apple has finally allowed us to talk about this more openly. I've created an alphabet soup definition, which is LBLSAR.
Yeah, that just rolls right off the tongue. Huh?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's poetic. It's location-based lock screen app recommendation. Now, Apple will finally name this. Now, what does this mean? It means in iOS 8, moving forward, your lock screen today will display an icon of an app that's related to the exact location that you're at. The current exactness is going to be Wi-Fi and cellular, type of triangulation and geofencing. In the future, it's going to be iBeacons. And what this really means is that if that merchant is in fact beaconing in some way, and they don't have an app, the iWallet now has the mechanism to notify that person that the payment system that Apple is going to be deploying is ready to be used. Today, it will tell you if you're walking into Starbucks that you should download the Starbucks app, or better yet, you have it. Click on the icon on the lock screen and it will open up the Starbucks app. Now, it seems like just a little kind of side thing. This is like a lot of these Apple iWallet things. They're just sort of nebulous on the edge of things. And it's like, well, that's kind of cool, but it's not a big thing. Nobody's done anything like this before. And Apple telegraphed this, and I started talking about it, about a year and a half ago. When you went to iTunes, there was right there in the center, the most expensive piece of real estate along the bottom bar. If you go to your Apple iTunes, iPhone or iPad location for purchasing apps, you'll see right in the middle a little icon that says "Near Me." And a lot of people said, why is Apple doing this? This is so dumb. You press it and you get maybe the local newspaper. It's not very populated. So why curate to that level? This is the beginnings of why they're going to do that. Now, here's the reality. If, in fact, this is such a powerful feature that Apple has spent all this time working on it, just to note that we did a sort of a study, and it turns out that just 2% of U.S. businesses have an app, and that's giving
U.S. brick and mortar?
Yes, have an app. So why would you create a lock screen notification for something that is only going to impact 2% of the U.S. businesses unless you have another agenda, and that is to notify people when they walk into a business that there is another app that they can open up and facilitate perhaps a transaction, perhaps something even more complex than that. And that's why calling this a wallet is not such a good idea. So when we started this whole thing about Square failing, it's because they didn't send out map makers and surveyors. They just went out there and said, this is cool, let's run with it.
So iBeacons is really their key that no one else has had previously. No one else could have done what they're doing because of iBeacons.
And well, part of it, and you'll hear it first here. Go and do a search right now. Nobody's connecting this app recommendation system with iBeacons today. And you'll all of a sudden you'll start hearing everybody talk about it, and then it would be like, oh, everybody knew this was going to happen. Right now, if you go and search what this app notification thing is, it's sort of like a mention of the last paragraph of people talking about iOS 8. And this is classic when we start decoding what we see in iOS 8. And speaking of decoding, the most massive decoding that has taken place is something within what appears to be Safari only. And this is the ability to scan a credit card. And this is the smoking gun.
Safari only browser inside your iPhone.
Theoretically, all I can say is if you really do your research, this is not a Safari call; it's an iOS 8 call.
No one's going to do the research, so we're relying on you, Brian.
Okay, so if you do the research, I'm just trying to get some of these.
Even on the OS X, probably.
What's that? There's no doubt. There's no doubt. Yeah,
using the the computer cam.
Exactly, and it started almost 2 years ago, and I wrote about this in Core, and nobody thought it was a big deal. What Apple did, and the most frustrating thing I had with Apple gift cards, is first to take off that label, which I would always somehow scratch the heck out of the numbers, until they made it a sticker that you can actually remove. Thank you, Apple, for that. But then entering all those numbers and letters, do I do uppercase, lowercase? What am I doing here? So Apple secretly started testing within iTunes the ability for you to hold up your Apple gift card. And it worked phenomenally well. I mean, it was just boom, you pulled up the card, instantaneous. And even when numbers were not highly readable, and I think they had their own checking algorithm at play there, because I remember experimenting and I literally scraped out two of the numbers, one letter, one number in the sequence, and it still read it. And I said, "Oh, you guys are using a little cheat on the back end." But fine, I don't care. It saved me time. And I wrote that this is a feature that Apple's going to be using as a loading feature for the iWallet. How do you get all the cards into iWallet that you don't already have, Apple? Well, you make it easy for people to scan cards. Now, is Apple going to send dongles out to everybody, card readers? No. What they're doing is using optics technology. But this is really massive because it's an e-commerce and retail play all at once, and it's not immediately obvious. It just looks like a little added feature. And the added feature, by the way, is quite profound. You go to a website that has any payment form, and that website doesn't have to notify you or even care that you have this technology. It will never know you had the technology. Apple does the detection automatically, lexiconically analyzing the data stream, looking at it and saying, oh, this is a payment form. Okay, hold your card up. It literally pops up. It allows you to do a card entry using the number keypad now. Prior to this, Safari would just give you the standard keyboard. When it pops up, it automatically gives you the number keypad and dumps you into the numeric submission area within that form.
So they make it easier, but they don't do anything massively different. I mean, it seems like what unfortunately I perceive as Apple's announcements many times are just improvements, right? They change the look and style and the UI of things, while Google just massively innovates on spaces that are completely unknown. It seems like Apple has made fairly incremental improvements in many areas.
No self-driving car at the Worldwide Developer
Conference. Car, man. And
well, let's just dive into this and follow me for a second. Humor me on this. So, all right. So we're now making card entry into payment forms massively simpler. This technology was always there. Jumio and Card.io, and there's actually predates this. There's other companies that have had products and apparently, supposedly, had intellectual property rights on some of this. It is not abundantly clear if Apple is licensing this technology. My insiders are telling me that they are absolutely not, that the pre-existing claims were invalid, but we'll see. I'm not calling it either way. I see it in my analysis of the technology. It does not look like either Card.io or Jumio's algorithms, but I could be wrong.
Today, currently, Jumio, correct me if I'm wrong, remains independent while Card.io was acquired by PayPal.
PayPal a while ago, and not for long. I think Jumio. I think somebody's going to sop that up.
Where are they? What's their size now? Faisal, do you know their current team size, or how do you look at their?
I don't,
progress?
But I do know that they're doing pretty big in the government identification space.
Yeah, a lot of them moved to that.
They've gone into the passport and the ID check scans phase, and they've expanded outside the U.S. So they have an SDK which you can implement, and
quite powerful.
It's a pretty strong candidate because almost every phone and computer now comes with an optical camera.
Yeah, and high resolution enough to do a lot more than what anybody's done. So they're on a great path. Now we have this simplicity of doing what we would call an e-commerce transaction. Now, humor me here. Now, imagine if I had a retail business and I wanted to accept payment cards, and for whatever reason, I wasn't using Square. How could I do that? Well, it's entirely possible that some of the companies we've talked to before who are doing online payments specifically could now enter into what is essentially the retail space. If iBeacons, let's just say that Apple just leaves all of these, APIs open. If a company like Balanced or Stripe recognize the power of iBeacons, they could, in fact, initiate a situation where somebody can get a payment form that just simply presents a form on the cell phone, on the iPad, on the iPhone, and allows somebody to scan their card in real time. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's going to take a lot of time. When you do the test on Apple's technology, it actually takes less than 3 seconds for the card to be scanned and approved. Actually much faster than my research with most of the card readers that I've seen, both PayPal and Square included. The misreads, by the way, of these devices are an order of magnitude too high. Even the latest versions misread the card way too often the first time and way too often the second time. So in theory, if you only had to swipe the card one time and you just knew how to position your thumb the right way so that the device doesn't spin around in the now present 3.5 millimeter jack. And again, a lot of people look at that and say it's no big deal. Try swiping those cards 30, 40, 50 times an hour.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
It's a hard thing on your thumb. It's a hard thing on your audio jack. Imaging the card is actually, in some cases, faster. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with the potential that there are going to be orders of magnitude more competitors in the retail micro merchant space primarily, because it's those merchants that are where everybody seems to want to go after. It also has some very unique use cases on upscale merchants, but I won't go down that road.
So, Brian,
right now.
if this is Apple's way of building out a technology that a lot of merchants can use without relying on, say, the individual software application, right? Because if you're going to a website or you're going to a merchant and you are giving them your credit card, you're relying on whatever software provider they're using to process that card, and many of which, they suck. The UI is terrible. They have to enter the thing. It refreshes, whatever it is. Square comes along and provides just a great user experience.
Absolutely.
Software. So one of the posts that you wrote about, which I found quite inspiring as to where Apple will go, is removing this 3.5 millimeter jack. And if
it's gone. Yeah.
Now, what makes you think with utmost certainty it is gone? In the next version of the iPhone,
no.
How likely is it that it is not there?
Let's pull out my roulette table. I never make specific iPhone. It's going to be on iOS. iPhone 6 or iPhone 6.5, whatever. The reason I do that is because Apple themselves doesn't know. This is a dynamic, and a lot of people are really messed up with that notion. Apple makes a lot of dynamic choices, and some of them are literally days to production. If you read about how the first iPhone was literally carried in somebody's
This has got to be so big, though. This is such a, when you look at software, I could understand that. But if you're looking at hardware, the hardware dictates everything inside the phone, the heat capacitors.
The jack's gone. Here's why. And it's hard for people to understand. When I first wrote it in 2011, I literally had people yelling at me. They were massively angry, especially
people love their headphone jacks.
No, especially startup founders who were starting payment companies and had payment companies, because they based their entire business plan on the premise that the 3.5 jack was going to be there. Now, if you're going to pay me to see the future, and I don't have any specific skill set other than I do a lot of research, but you want my opinion on this, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do the domain research necessary. And I go out to the patents. And the patents clearly state in 2008 that Apple is on its path to eliminate the 3.5 jack. Okay, so that's there. What is the psychological reason for this? It's a very Steve Jobs and it's a very Apple system. Do you guys miss your RS-232 jack on your computer? You're missing your IEEE.
Faisal does.
Your IEEE 488. How about your floppy drive? How about your CD and DVD?
Faisal rallies to bring them back, Brian.
Yeah,
Well, if you look at all this, the Star Treks and everything, I've never seen someone wearing headphones with a pair of wires going down to a 3.5 jack. So it's going to go wireless somewhere down the line,
Yeah. So it's obvious. And now what's the case?
Obsolescence setting in.
Obsolescence already there. And it's one of the foundational reasons Beats was acquired, because we're going to high resolution audio. And now one of the ways you're going to do that is to marginalize the 3.5 jack and go to a digital jack, which we're currently calling the Lightning connector. So, a lot of people said, well, I don't want Bluetooth headphones. I never alleged that was going to be the only option. The Lightning connector is now clearly going to be that way. Why? Because Apple just announced it in the MiFi overview. Essentially, to use the Lightning connector legally, you have to pay Apple a royalty. And it's called the MiFi program. And the royalty is going to break the hearts of a lot of people who give away free card readers if they are going to present a card reader that connects to a MiFi royalty system. Well, by the way, that's one of the reasons why the audio jack was being used by a lot of the card readers, not way before Square. I mean, Square didn't invent the audio jack card reader. There's a gentleman in Boston that invented that 6 years before. And the concept has been around for 2 decades.
But that's not, Brian, that's not new, right? They had been previously streaming audio signal through the Lightning connection.
Yes, but now what they're doing is they're making it a hardware specification for headphones that will include external digital analog converters, noise cancellation features. See, one of the ways Apple is going to really promote Bluetooth headphones and high-end headphones is the benefits it offers. Very high-level noise suppression, but with the ability for you to hear an emergency vehicle show. Imagine you're wearing headphones going down the street. Everything is blocked out other than the guy that's saying, hey, don't cross the street right now, and the fire engine going by. Now, you and I have never thought about that. Apple thought about that, and it's within patents that are out there. These things are going to radically change people's sphere of entertainment. Over-the-ear headphones are a big problem in a sense that if you're out in the greater world and you don't have the proper system set up, you're not going to hear what's going on. I think it should be illegal, and I think in most states it is, to have over-the-ear headphones while driving a car. Because if somebody's got that booted up to 11 or 12, you're not going to hear anything. But then again, some people with their in-car audio are doing the same thing. Anyway, I digress. My point is, the jack is going away for a lot of different reasons, primarily because Apple has done incredibly well with Wi-Fi, transfer handoffs. We're already seeing that with an iOS 8. I mean, I live by my ability to move my digital content, whether it's music or video, onto my big screen, off my iPhone.
Okay,
so I'm coming home.
I think we can believe that. Right, yeah. We can believe that the headphone is inevitably going to disappear. Eventually, there'll be a phone with no connections in it. Right,
absolutely.
You'll charge
Magnetics.
it by putting it on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and if I'm going to elaborate on that, from what I've seen, with the elimination of the 3.5 jack, with the optics coming in for card scanning, this is just a hunch, but I feel that in-cloud apps is probably going to be the next thing.
Yeah,
you don't have to actually download the app. If you want to use a one-time app, it'll just work just like your browser. Everything is downloaded like a web, like a web page, but it'll show up as an app, and you're done, and that's it, gone.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Yeah.
And that stems from the fact that Apple has very subtly allowed apps to talk to each other.
That's
so
a
if you
big
have
thing.
It is because
the opening
how
of the
many
sandbox.
apps. Well, it's a hardware restriction. I mean, how many apps do I really want to have? And you want to use my processing power. So as a premium service, if you always want to have all the apps, they'll stay in the cloud. They'll just be served as and when you walk into a retail location. The iBeacon pops up and says, "Hey, you want to use the in-cloud app right now? You press it. There it is. You use it.
Yeah.
You leave, and it's gone. Done."
Exactly.
Yeah, I think Brett, like Faisal, you like what we define when we think of downloading an app. Which means basically I'm streaming a packet of Objective-C onto the hardware.
But
Swift in the future.
It's not about downloading. It's more about downloading it, installing it, getting the apps and settings right, giving it the permissions. You don't have to do all that. If I'm going to go to Target only once, I see the Target app, I'll see everything else. Just like the iBeacon, I see that iBeacon if I approach a product and it, pops up the information about the review or the price or what have you. It was a one-time thing, I didn't have to
Faisal,
download.
you're talking about iOS 9. It's almost like you're an insider now. This is great.
I'm telling you,
serious.
it's going to happen. It's going to happen because downloading an app, someone's going to say, you know what, it's so yesterday. Let's
exactly.
reinvent it.
Yeah, and now, if you know this, and I think you're 100% right, and I think not only do patents, but my internal and external dialogues are going in that direction. How does that change the entire app economy? What does that do? And the fact is, we virtualized our music. We don't own it anymore.
It's going to overlap. So there's going to be a transition for utilizing the computing power of the phone, for using the GPS, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. The downloadable app would offer more premium, obviously, more better functionality, more clarity. The resolution would be higher as far as functionality.
And no more updates. No more little icons that you need to update 99 apps.
So the resolution of the functionalities would be much higher. Your location would be more accurate. Your camera settings would be more accurate. Your interaction with nearby mobile devices would be more accurate. The skinned down version, or the scuttle down version, or the very light version that you're downloading from the app cloud, or for lack of a better word, let's just call it the app cloud, would offer the basic the bare metal elements for you to go into Target and use our app. It may not offer the very advanced features of the downloadable app that Target offers.
But
and you don't want to do that.
That's just a transition anyway, right? As we have higher speed connections, do you really even need the app to really be local, right?
So I've got an answer for that. Think about email. I wanted at one point in time, all the email was in my computer.
Yeah.
Where is it now? It's on the cloud. I really don't want it on my computer. My computer is more powerful. My computer has more memory. It has more bandwidth. It is faster in accessing. Yet I've moved my email away.
I miss Adora, but I listen. I think
used to love Adora.
Yeah, all the windows. So what we're talking about is we're talking about a reshaping of the way the entire economy is going to work at some future date. And what does it mean for rental? I mean, if Apple is in fact moving in a direction where people don't want ownership of music, for example, anymore, and people want to stream it. What would a streaming app represent? What would that incremental income represent to Apple that you're using it per day, per hour, per week? Can you imagine how that would transformative change that would have in the economy?
Well, we're already there. We're there with Pandora and Spotify. I don't think people desire to own music nearly like they used to, right?
Yeah,
people being born now.
Imagine it this way: if you have an app, and let's just take the Starbucks app, you have to download it. You probably have to do something with it. On the flip side, in a parallel world, if you will, you scan your card using the optics. It's there, sitting in some block box. You enter
Secure
Target.
enclave. Yeah.
You enter Target. Your lock screen shows up, says, "Do you want to use the app one time?" You hit yes. It just downloads the screens from the app, from the app cloud, and you use it. It communicates with your lockbox where your credit card details are stored. You pay, you go out, done. And once you've left the vicinity, let's say after 100 meters or after 100 minutes or what have you, it's erased from your cache.
Evaporated. Yeah, this is beautiful. And everything that I'm seeing about Apple opening up iCloud for developers, Apple opening up the sandbox for developers, and within the code set of Swift, the new programming language, I think we're all pointing in that direction. And Faisal is just like literally, one big step ahead of where this is, where it's going to be really beginning to be obvious. But
hey, Faisal, let me ask you. So now the EMV, maybe you could touch a little bit on this, but if you were to go into another country now, say even in Europe from the States, and you have a standard, MC, American Express, Discover, Visa card, and you try to use that in, say, a metro or a restaurant, I know we talked about this a little pre-show. What is the experience like now? And then does Apple foresee anything to give you the ability to pay in a secure way, regardless of where you are in the world?
Well, right now, I cited 4 countries. It was Germany, it was France, it was Italy, and Spain. You cannot use a magstripe card without a chip.
So explain this a little bit. When we say a chip, what do they have that we don't?
The chip. They don't have a magstripe reader. It's an insert. They do not have a magstripe reader.
We're talking EMV, right? EMV?
Yeah.
Chip and
yeah.
Because I think most people, most general consumers do not understand that this massive shift has happened.
If you look at the credit card, some credit cards, I don't know if they're issued in the U.S., and I think they might be, but generally the answer is no. If you look at a credit card, it'll come with a little microchip on it. It has the magstripe, it has the embossed name, it has the expiry date, everything. It has a CVV code at the back, but it has a little chip on it. And these days, when you go to a retailer, they're not swiping it. They're not running it through the traditional swipe and reading the magstripe. What they do is they just insert it like into an ATM, like the ATM slot. They just insert the card, and that's it. And that's it. The transaction is done. In some cases, they'll ask you for a PIN, and if the PIN, they'll give you a PIN pad, you enter your PIN, and that's it. It's a very, very secure transaction. Now, if you're an American with your regular card that does not have a chip, and you stand at the metro station in Paris, guess what? There is no magstripe. You'll put your card in, it'll give an error in French and in English, and presumably other languages, and that's it. And now
So what would you do then? You can't get on the metro.
No, you cannot. You'll have to go outside, go to some exchange company, what have you, swipe it and get some euros and what have you. But your card will not work. And that's a huge problem. A lot of the people in the travel industry are now giving advisory notices as to where your traditional American cards will not work. And by that, I do not mean a traditional, they're global brands, but, telling you if you have a regular, magstripe card, well, it won't work here in Spain, it won't work here in Spain, it won't work here in Spain, and so forth. So be advised.
So Americans traveling abroad really have to sort of map out where they are able to go. That's amazing.
And Faisal, where does Apple stand on this? Do they provide the technology to get around this? This seems like an unnecessary hassle that people are going to have to face.
Now, to the best of my knowledge, no payment company per se has actually gone and integrated with the metro station in France or Spain or even in the UK. For example, in the UK, I think it's going to be sometime this year you will not be able to use coins anymore on the bus. So your old traditional route masters, or what have you, it's now all contactless payments. You cannot use the coins are simply not an option. So until and unless you actually go and forge a relationship with them to accept your payment system, there's nothing much you can do. And insofar as I can tell, I do not think that such a relationship has been forged. And the bigger name would be, let's say PayPal or the traditional payment players in Europe, prevailing in Europe. They've really not gone there yet. The traditional ATM networks have, but then again, if you're looking at Europe, all European cards are issued with the chip and PIN. So, it's very native.
On that scenario, we're talking about NFC. They're giving you these cards that are essentially giving you access using an NFC chip, opening the gates. Is that what we're talking about in that case?
Yeah.
Now, how pervasive is that element of technology from your travels, not only locally to you, but your travels around the world? How often are you seeing NFC use cases like that?
NFC, not too much, but I'll tell you, I went to Dubai recently for the cards and payments show that was happening there. And for 5 days, not a single magstripe.
Wow.
It was all chip. I mean, and all my cards are chip issued, but not a single magstripe card. I did have one card that is just magstripe, but when the guy saw it, he looked at me, and then he says, "Identification, please." So that's when I just gave him the other card.
How about taxi cabs? Did you take a taxi?
Yeah, absolutely. Taxi cabs take the chip. They have got the POS reader over there. It's all chip and pen.
Faisal, the Leslie Berland is the, I believe her title is Digital Partnerships at American Express. And her role, as described in this article, is she is paid to think about ways to make her company's flagship product, the card, obsolete. And she recently went on Andreessen Horowitz's podcast, I believe, and basically said exactly this, that one day there won't be credit cards. There won't be physical cards. And American Express, I believe, leads the way in thinking about what does this experience look like? What does our company look like when there are no physical cards? Do you think?
And I'll tell you, it's going to be that beautiful American Express logo, digitally embossed on your phone, somewhere on a screen that's good enough to go. Mm-hmm. I mean, holding a physical card is so yesterday now. You know, mm-hmm. It's the American Express card is now doing a whole lot of more business in prepaid. I mean, look at their Blue and Surf cards; they're doing phenomenal business. You know, and you get the same American Express services, etc. Naturally, they're not going to just cannibalize their existing card mechanisms and the loyalty and benefits you get from them.
The same way telephone lines exist.
Absolutely. Eventually, you'll see the majority of the market. An American Express card would be that beautiful logo, like an app logo, sitting on your phone.
Absolutely, and that's why it's important for Google and Apple to be in this ecosystem, because without their participation, in their support to the nth degree, you're not going to have the universality.
It's to me, it's like the traditional thing. So you have a startup, and I'm going to give a very tangential example. Analogous example is, you're a fashion designer or what have you. You're a brand. You're a retail shop, and it's going to be very expensive for you to compete in the print magazine, because the ad in the print magazine is $30,000 or $40,000 in Vogue or GQ or whatever it is. But when you go online, you're going to have IBM online as IBM.com, and you can have your name online as yourname.com. The cost of putting up a website is has gone down in recent years. It's the greatest equalizer. That's what they keep saying. The internet is the greatest equalizer. Well, just elaborate that. Sort of expand on that, and the greatest equalizer in payments is going to be the mobile phone. So American Express, Visa, MasterCard will be competing with the homegrown solutions, and they'll have to fight for their turf, because anyone can make an app. If it's a good app and they get the traction in that local market, they'll probably win. So it all comes down to branding. They will have to spend a whole lot of money on branding to try to convince people to pay more to use their app. Because your homegrown solutions are going to be cheaper. They won't be global, but they'll be cheaper.
And have deeper roots, right? I mean, once something has taken root, this is the challenge that Square faced. iZettle versus Square in Europe.
Yeah. MasterCard just made a statement, a very bold statement, that in I don't know how many years, 70%, they will reduce cash transactions by 70% in Nigeria.
Yeah,
that's that's coming under the umbrella of what MasterCard calls financial inclusion.
Yes,
basically saying that I'm going to issue you MasterCard-based prepaid or postpaid debit cards.
Well, look what M-Pesa did.
Payroll. Which will include your payroll, pensions, etc. But then guess what? There will be companies, there will be banks, there will be interests in Nigeria which will say, well, hold on, why do we need to pay MasterCard? Why can't we have our own homegrown brand, our indigenous payment system? This is exactly what Russia is going through right now.
Yeah. Russia just released one of the biggest hackers they've had in prison to actually build their payment system. And
Poland has already gone that route. 12 banks have already gone that route. So they're already doing that.
This is a big thing. And, it was initiated because of political pressure. Visa and MasterCard are not very happy because the deposit requirements to operate a payment network in Russia now is outrageous. Even though they negotiated it down, it's still very large. We're going to see a lot of this balkanization, but at some future date, they're all going to link together in the back. Yeah. I mean, the back end is going to link.
I agree. I think it's that phrase, the mobile is going to be the great equalizer in payments.
I love it.
You'll have to go and compete in that space.
Well, if you look at what a former guest, Brett King, was talking about, the whole financial inclusion, I mean, there's parts around the world that are leaps and bounds ahead of the United States in the way they interact with money, with what we now call the new banking system. We can go back to M-Pesa and look at how an entire banking system was built around cellular airtime, essentially. It's phenomenal. And this whole thing is going to contort and shape its way into the, first world markets, if you will. But it's going to manifest in a lot of different ways. That's why approaching this brute force is never going to be a solution.
You could be the president of Bank of America. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how big of a financial bank you run in the U.S., you cannot buy a ticket of Metro in Paris on your card.
Yeah, no exceptions.
So that would sort of give you, that would give you some sort of, a reality check as to where you are in the world today. And if you want to buy a meal, a good expensive meal in Dubai, and you want to use your Max Stripe, well, you better have your passport ready because they will ask for a form of identification.
And it may not even be accepted. They're not obligated to accept your Max Stripe credit card in those regions. And a lot of people don't recognize that. I've had friends that know that I have a credit card background call me up. One was in the middle of the night, and they were somewhere in Europe, I think Italy.
But bars in
they wouldn't
Dubai
take the card.
Don't accept it now.
So Faisal,
this guy had to go and wire money to pay his tab, $250 US. I wired him money. So they pay for it because they wouldn't take his credit card.
Faisal, if you're looking at this and you're saying, boy, you really understand these problems, what do you give as an open announcement to the major opportunities to either product entrepreneurs looking for their next project, or current founders of payment companies looking to improve or pivot in some way, looking for the next thing to get a hold of and jump up on? Other than
the very basic one, look outside the borders of the U.S.?
Yeah.
Love that.
I mean, what do you say to people why do you think people do not look outside the borders? Is it just that the squirrel in the front yard is the most important thing that they can see?
The U.S. is so big. There was a question on Quora, why don't they fine the U.S. bank billions of dollars that they do with foreign banks? And the same and simple and plain answer is the foreign banks need the U.S. market. The U.S. banks do not need the foreign market. The U.S. is a huge economy. It is there. It's there to stay. So when you have rightfully startups, if they haven't traveled abroad, how do you expect them to go and conquer that world?
Actually, Faisal, it brings up a good point. I have a couple friends who, as you go through multiple startup cycles, you go through this inflection period where you're sort of self-discovering yourself and figuring out what you want to work on next. And a lot of people rely on traveling. And actually, one of my good friends now, he's in this rare situation where his house actually caught fire. And while it's going through repairs, he's traveling. And I was trying to give him ideas as to where to go. He's talking about going anywhere in the world. And how would you plan a trip if you're a founder looking for inspiration on other countries? Maybe not even necessarily in payments. Say in payments, but whatever is most relevant. I think. Well,
for payments, I would definitely go attend some of the big conferences. There's a conference in Paris that happens just before Lee Web. It happens in November. It's called CARTES, CARTES. It is a huge event that happens in Paris. It's all about payments. It's based on identity, contactless payments, card payments, anything to do with payments, and this is the show to attend. One of the world's largest IT shows is not, people used to say it's the Comdex. Comdex was nothing, and I mean Comdex Las Vegas was perhaps, I would say, 1/3 of what the size of CeBIT is.
Wow.
I don't know if you heard about CeBIT.
I've been to CeBIT one time, but I didn't have any idea it grew that large.
CeBIT Hanover has a directory that would make the old Yellow Pages of New York put to shame,
Wow.
I mean, it is so.
So that took over the
huge.
Comdex mantle, because Comdex is really nothing. The CES show is probably bigger.
Well, yeah, the CeBIT's been happening for over 25 years, 30 years. So they've always maintained the number one spot. So there are huge opportunities in the payment space, all these conferences that are happening. And a market that is absolutely ignored is Africa.
Yeah.
One needs to go to Africa. One needs to go to and they are centered around three countries essentially: South Africa, Kenya, for obvious reasons, and Egypt. So these are the three countries you want to visit, and for the shows that they do. South Africa being a very strong technology provider, Kenya being the middle ground because of the M-Pesa and everything revolving around the M-Pesa experience and trying to learn from it, etc. So Africa is a huge I mean, if you look at the size of Africa, juxtapose. You could probably fit in 2-3 continents on Africa, and it's still huge,
Yeah, the maps don't do it justice.
And then when you're going
Absolutely.
to these conferences, and say you come from, what I find most interesting is if you bring knowledge of a place that you have to a place that doesn't have that knowledge, there's natural business opportunity. Do you say the same thing with a conference there?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
looking at it.
Who's attending the conference? The locals mostly. Of course, there'll be visitors, but locals. And what are the locals looking at? Solutions. And what is one thing they want? They want to be able to partner up with someone who's done the hard work and made the solution. And they would like to give it a shot in their country or territory. So you could be in Kenya and they could be from Zaire, and they would want to say, well, how can we do this? And then you start a dialogue. And in that dialogue, you sort of, get to understand the local acclimatization features that they want. Features that are perhaps too American for them and are not required,
I would also add to the itinerary going to Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Japan.
Those are advanced
Beijing.
markets, definitely.
Just to see how these different environments have looked at payments and have had interactions with technologies that sometimes in the United States we think, well, that's not going to come, they're not going to use it. I mean,
London,
I'm sure
London, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Sydney.
Mike, you've been to Singapore, right?
I lived in Singapore for a year, and I would say that it is more interesting in my perspective to go to countries that just about have the bottom of the barrel technology, because you can go there and make a drastic change.
Oh, you mean to actually change the world? Africa and China are the two undiscovered
China is very
continents.
difficult to penetrate.
Impossible.
But it's difficult. It's not impossible. But B, it's the language. You need to understand the language, and you need to understand how things are done in China.
The culture.
It's different. It's culture. So unless you haven't spent time over there, or you don't have a partner who spent time over there, it's going to be very frustrating trying to do business over there.
But you can envision a day where your average Chinese would have access to an instant payment system on their smartphone, and how revolutionary that would be.
My friend, your average Chinese has a smartphone payment system that is at least 2 orders of magnitude more advanced than what you have in the U.S. right now.
Wow. So you're talking your average farmer who can bring goods to the market and charge
when
on
you
a
have Alipay and you have 755 million users, how many cities do you think you cover?
We need to do a show on Alipay.
You're absolutely right.
You're talking 2.5, almost 2.25 times the population of the United States.
So how deep does that go into their culture? And this will be a teaser for our future show. I mean, does it go down to the very, small family farmer
Absolutely.
brick maker?
They trade their hogs and their ducks and their wheat and their rice using the phones.
Wow.
Boy.
So
we should take
happened.
a field trip over there and document what's actually happening. I think just talking about it's not nearly as strong, and I think Brian and I, especially living in this this quarantine country of ours, that we don't see how life is like. That's interesting. So, Faisal, if someone is thinking about traveling the world now, are they welcome to stay at your place in Pakistan?
110%.
All right.
Don't even have to ask.
Awesome, guys. All right. I think we'll wrap it up here. This has been a great show.
Wonderful.
We'll have this up soon.
Thank you, guys. Take care. Have a good one.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.